On February 28, 2026, the United States and Israel launched coordinated air and missile strikes on targets inside Iran. Iran responded with missiles and drones aimed at Israel and at U.S. targets in the region. Within days, the conflict spread beyond the initial attacks, and very quickly, one question became global. What does this mean for oil, prices, and the world economy? Here's the situation explained step by step. Why did the United States and Israel attack Iran? The official explanation from the United States and Israel was this. They said Iran was getting dangerously close to building a nuclear weapon. They also said Iran's missile program and military infrastructure posed a growing threat, especially to Israel. So, from their point of view, the strikes were a preventive military action. Their stated goal was to damage nuclear-related facilities, missile systems, military infrastructure, and parts of Iran's command structure. There was also another factor. Diplomatic negotiations over Iran's nuclear program had been going on for months. According to the U.S. and Israeli position, those negotiations had failed, so their argument was, diplomacy did not stop Iran. Therefore, military action was necessary. A third reason was strategic. The strikes were also meant to weaken Iran's military leadership and reduce its regional influence. So, officially, the attack was presented as a way to stop a future threat before it became bigger. Was that the real reason? Or just an excuse? A lot of people see it exactly that way. They think the nuclear argument was not the full story, and maybe not the real story at all. Critics say there was no immediate attack that justified a war of this scale. Intelligence about nuclear programs is often uncertain, and security arguments can also serve as a political cover for strategic goals. So yes, many critics see the nuclear justification as a pretext, or at least as an incomplete explanation. Why does this conflict matter so much economically? Because this is not just a regional war. It directly touches one of the most important energy choke points in the world, the Strait of Hormuz. A huge part of the world's oil and gas trade passes through that narrow route. That means even if the conflict remains regional, the economic effects can be global. When markets fear disruption there, three things happen very quickly. Oil prices rise, shipping costs rise, and inflation pressure increases. That is why countries far away from the battlefield are still heavily affected. Which countries are affected the most? The countries most affected by the conflict fall into three groups. Group 1, directly affected by war and military danger. These are the countries in or near the conflict zone. The most directly affected are Iran, bombings, damage to infrastructure, pressure on oil exports. Israel, missile attacks and military operations. United States, direct military involvement and regional bases. Other countries in the region are also highly exposed. Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, Qatar, Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates. Many of these countries have oil or gas infrastructure near the Persian Gulf, which makes them vulnerable if the conflict spreads. Group 2, countries most financially exposed. These are the countries that depend heavily on oil and gas from the Persian Gulf. And this is where the biggest economic vulnerability is. The most exposed are China, India, Japan, South Korea. Why these countries? Because they are major energy importers, and a large share of that energy comes through the Strait of Hormuz. That means Asia is economically the most vulnerable region in this crisis. Group 3, indirectly affected through prices and inflation. Then there are countries that are not hit first militarily, but are hit through global markets. That includes Europe, United States, and many developing countries. In Europe, countries with large industrial sectors are especially sensitive to energy prices. That includes Germany, Italy, Spain, Greece, Poland, Belgium. So the short ranking looks like this. Most directly affected, Iran, Israel, Gulf states. Most financially exposed, China, India, Japan, South Korea. Indirectly affected through inflation and energy prices, Europe, the US, many poorer importing countries. Which countries could profit from the conflict? Wars often redistribute economic advantages, and some countries can benefit economically or geopolitically when oil prices rise or competitors are weakened. Russia. One of the biggest potential winners is Russia. Why? Because Russia exports large amounts of oil and gas. When prices rise, Russia earns more money per barrel. That means higher export revenues. There is also a geopolitical effect. The more global attention shifts to the Middle East, the less attention goes to Russia's war in Ukraine. So if oil stays expensive, Russia benefits financially. Country, United States, partly through energy. The United States can also benefit indirectly through its energy sector. Why? Because the U.S. is a major exporter of oil and LNG. When oil prices rise, American shale production becomes more profitable. U.S. gas exports become more valuable, and Europe may buy more American energy. Politically and militarily, of course, the conflict is also a risk for the United States. So this is not a simple advantage. But economically, parts of the U.S. energy sector can benefit. Norway. Norway is another likely winner. It exports a lot of gas to Europe, so when energy prices rise, Norwegian state revenues tend to rise as well. That already happened during the European energy crisis before. Higher prices usually mean stronger income for Norway, Saudi Arabia, and other Gulf exporters. Countries like Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and the United Arab Emirates can also profit from higher oil prices, as long as their infrastructure is not badly damaged. If their exports continue, expensive oil means much higher revenues. How could this conflict affect the global economy? When conflicts happen in major energy regions, the first place where the impact shows up is energy prices. The reason is simple. A large share of the world's oil moves through the Strait of Hormuz. Around 20% of global oil supply passes through this narrow route. If shipping there becomes risky or disrupted, oil markets react very quickly. Even the risk of disruption can push prices higher. And when oil prices rise, the effects spread through the entire global economy. United States. In the United States, the first place people usually notice the impact is gasoline prices. Higher global oil prices mean higher costs for refineries and fuel distributors. That can lead to higher prices at the gas pump, more expensive flights, higher trucking and shipping costs. And because transportation affects almost every industry, higher fuel costs can eventually increase the price of many everyday goods. At the same time, the United States is also one of the world's largest oil producers. That means higher oil prices can increase profits for American energy companies. So the effect in the U.S. is mixed. Consumers pay more, but parts of the energy sector earn more. Europe. In the European Union, rising energy prices can have a strong economic impact. Many European countries rely heavily on imported energy. When global oil and gas prices rise, Europe often feels the effects quickly. That can lead to higher fuel prices, higher electricity and heating costs, higher production costs for industry. Energy-intensive industries such as chemicals, metals, fertilizers, and manufacturing are especially sensitive to rising energy prices. Because of that, higher energy costs can increase inflation and slow economic growth. Global impact. Globally, higher energy prices affect almost every country. Large energy importers such as China, India, Japan, and South Korea are particularly exposed. These countries depend heavily on oil and gas imports from the Middle East. Higher energy prices increase costs across their entire economies. That can lead to higher inflation, higher transportation costs, higher food prices, slower economic growth. Developing countries are often the most vulnerable because rising fuel and food prices can put serious pressure on household budgets. Which countries benefit from higher prices? While higher energy prices create problems for many countries, they can also create economic advantages for major energy exporters. For example, Russia exports large volumes of oil and natural gas. When oil prices rise, Russia earns more money for every barrel it sells. Higher prices can therefore increase Russian export revenues. Another country that can benefit is Norway. Norway exports large amounts of natural gas to Europe. When energy prices rise, Norwegian energy revenues typically rise as well. Parts of the energy sector in the United States can also benefit. Higher oil prices make American shale production more profitable and increase the value of U.S. energy exports. Some Gulf energy exporters, including Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and the United Arab Emirates, can also earn more when oil prices rise, as long as their infrastructure and shipping routes remain operational. The chain reaction. In other words, energy prices create a global chain reaction. War in an energy-producing region can lead to higher oil prices. Higher oil prices increase transport and production costs. And higher costs can eventually push prices up across the global economy. That is how a regional conflict can end up affecting prices around the world. What escalation scenario are analysts most worried about? The biggest trigger analysts are watching is a multi-front war against Israel. The key actor here is Hezbollah in Lebanon. Why Hezbollah? Because Hezbollah is much stronger militarily than most other armed groups in the region. It is believed to have more than 100,000 rockets, and it is strongly supported by Iran. If a large war starts between Israel and Hezbollah, the conflict could widen very fast. Then several things could happen at once. Israel would be fighting multiple enemies at the same time. Iran could support Hezbollah more strongly, and the United States could become more directly involved militarily. That would turn the current conflict from a regional confrontation into a much larger Middle East war. This is one of the escalation paths experts fear most. So the big question now is, what happens next? Does this conflict calm down in the next few weeks? Or could it escalate into a wider regional war? Which scenario do you think is more likely? Let us know in the comments.